Welcome to the KU Law Tuesday Talk sessions. This week we are really excited. We have two of our wonderful business and commercial law faculty members, Professor Stephen Ware and Professor Lua Yuille, who both bring a lot of expertise and knowledge to this area. I'm going to start by letting them introduce themselves. Please tell us who you are, what you did before you went to law school, and what you teach at KU Law. And
Lua, you go first.
There you
I
go.
was going to say, Steve, you go first.
Okay. My name is Stephen Ware, and I'm on this Zoom twice from two different computers because I am new to Zoom and I'm trying to learn different things I can do with Zoom if we're going to be teaching classes with Zoom, including screen sharing with one computer and then having the other computer available to do other things. But to answer the question that Steve Freedman asked at the beginning, I, as you can probably tell from my accent, am from New York, and I practiced law in New York City for a couple years before becoming a law professor. I was a law professor for 10 years at Cumberland School of Law, which is in Alabama, and then moved to KU in 2003. And have been very happy here ever since, and welcome all the new one-outs.
And I am Lua Yuille. As you can probably tell from my accent, I am not from New York. I am from California, but before I became a law professor, I did a lot of things. I had a really cool and varied career. I've taught every grade level from preschool. My first teaching job was during 4th grade, and I was an aide in a 2-year-old class, all the way up to obviously law school and doctoral programs. I've been a socioeconomic development lawyer. I have been a curriculum developer, but my big law job, I clerked, I did a lot of things, but my big law job was actually working at a really large corporate law firm in New York City, where I had a generalist corporate practice focused on Latin America. So whatever the businesses and countries of Latin America needed at any given time, that's what I was a specialist in.
Great. Well, listen, I'm going to ask the two professors a few questions, but at any time, people are welcome to join in with their questions. You can ask them on video. If you feel more comfortable asking in the chat room, that's fine too. And we'll address those questions one by one. But we do hope we have a nice crowd today. Welcome to everyone. We do hope that you'll join in this conversation. But I'll start the ball rolling with a few questions. Here's a very basic question. What is business and commercial law?
You think it's a basic question, but it turns out, unless you spend your life doing business or commercial law, few of us do both. Most folks, even lawyers, can't quite tell what they are. This year at KU Law School, we were really fortunate to get to go out into the academic job market and do some hiring. And part of our hiring committee had business folks on it, and the other folks were like, I can't tell from this CV. That seems businessy. But I'll take business law, and I think I'll toss commercial law to Professor Ware. Business law, think about all of the business type transactions that you do, from getting your Starbucks to entering into a contract with your employer, to working for a corporation or a partnership, which a lot of lawyers do, to going potentially to a hospital and you have professional businesses. And business law, as we talk about it for your purposes and for most of our purposes, is the law that deals with structuring those transactions and structuring those institutions, right? I just named two, the corporation and the partnership, which actually have to be created by law. There's a lot of other stuff that touches business law, but if you're taking business courses, you're really taking the classes that deal with how you create entrepreneurial legal organizations and how and the special rules involved with doing transactions or entering into contracts if you are one, or if you are doing business with one of those special kinds of institutions.
Professor Yuille really covered a lot of good material there, so I'll add a sort of personal twist, which hopefully will apply to some new KU law students, which is when I was in college, I studied history and political science. I was a liberal arts major. I didn't take any business school courses, and I certainly didn't have any familiarity with the more quantitative areas of business like accounting and finance. And for me, going to law school and taking courses that taught me a little accounting and finance, along with lots of business and commercial law, was a really good journey. I really felt like I was learning a lot of interesting and practical things. And then it enabled me to go to a big Wall Street law firm where that sort of knowledge, knowing the basics of what's a balance sheet and an income statement and how do companies raise money, was just such a big part of what the law firm does. So I would encourage everybody, particularly if you have a liberal arts background, to sort of go in fearlessly to business and commercial law. It's not like it's some kind of intimidating rocket scientist stuff. And it's really practical, interesting stuff too, because as Professor Yuille said, so much of what lawyers do is either representing businesses, helping businesses, or representing other parties who are dealing with businesses and therefore have to know how businesses operate. And the way I think of the basic distinction between business and commercial, but it's clearly not a rock solid, universally agreed line, is that what happens inside a business, the relationships of the owners, the directors and officers, the employees, that is very much business law as opposed to commercial law. And then commerce, that's different businesses buying and selling goods and services from each other as well. And as I mentioned, that raising money part of it, boy, the finance side of business is just so important. And you can take a KU law courses that get into that law, like securities law, bankruptcy law, law related to lending, and mergers and acquisitions.
So Professor Ware, I'm so glad you said that, because do you count, this is why it's a more complicated question, do you count securities regulation as business or commercial?
Well, that's a great example, because if you think about securities regulation, it's about businesses raising money either by issuing stock, equity, or by issuing bonds, debt. And the stuff we think of as commercial law, loans, sure looks a lot like bonds. And so that's the sort of the point, that this stuff does blur together.
Well, that's great. You know, a lot of folks, when they think of commercial law, they also think of commercial litigation. I understand that you guys, you know, that's not necessarily your area, but could you speak about commercial litigation as part of what you're learning?
I was a litigator in practice, suing people and helping my firm's clients when they got sued. That's what I did. And the transactional work that Professor Yuille mentioned often is the sort of distinctive of business and commercial law, putting together transactions. But there's no doubt about it, a lot of what business and commercial lawyers do also is litigate. And so there's a great overlap of business lawyers doing transactions, thinking about how do we structure this transaction to better our position if we have to sue or litigate, and then litigators having to talk to the transactional lawyers to get good advice for resolving the dispute.
Yeah, so I started my career splitting my time between litigation, and that was business litigation. It was predominantly securities litigation and traditional transactional practice. But like I said, my bread and butter was in Latin America. And so whatever was happening in Latin America was what I was doing. And so in 2008, the last time the economy collapsed, Latin America and the United States, I wound up doing this both domestically and abroad. Latin America had a lot of bankruptcy, and US companies that owned companies or resources in Latin America went bankrupt. And bankruptcy, big corporate bankruptcies, are a really great example, as Professor Ware can talk even more about, of the intersection of business and commercial, because it's litigators who go in front of the bankruptcy judge, but it's transactional attorneys who are negotiating on the back end with creditors, right? Because bankruptcy is, of course, when an individual, or in this case a company, cannot meet its debts when they become due. They cannot pay what they owe when they owe it. And so then they are able to use a sort of protection to get to renegotiate potentially what they owe. And so litigators, core litigators, and core transactional attorneys come together on this constant conversation. And so business and commercial law can be transactional, it can be litigation, or it can be both.
And Professor Yuille gives a great example there with business bankruptcy. And I'll just build on that with my time in practice as a litigator for a firm that represented businesses, which is, in my time there, I litigated an antitrust case, a securities fraud case, an environmental case, a bankruptcy case, a plain old breach of contract case. There was also some employee employment matters. In other words, business lawyers get to do such a wide variety of areas of law that, frankly, it just makes it fun. If you have an active mind and you don't want to just do the same darn thing over and over again year after year, business and commercial law tends to be a really good opportunity to give you the diversity, the variety.
Great. Yeah, we have a business and commercial law certificate program. What can you tell us about that? And would you recommend folks interested in business and commercial law to follow that path?
Yeah, there's a website page we've got with the courses, law.ku.edu/bizcom-certificates. You can see all the courses, and it's really testament to how strong our business and commercial curriculum is at KU, because we've got the required business associations or business organizations course, and then just a long list of transactional and litigation courses. So a student who comes out of that really is in great shape.
And I mean, the other thing that is really cool about the business and commercial law certificate in terms of practical value is that it demonstrates a sustained interest and a sustained development over time. So like Professor Ware said, you start in business organizations, and that's the foundational course in that certificate or in that area of law. But then you've got higher level courses that are sort of the second range of expertise across a wide, from tax to bankruptcy type courses. And then you've got even some capstone level courses that really get you deep in. I just finished last week, and you can see it on our Facebook page now, teaching a course with another one of our business law professors, Virginia Harper Ho, where we spent a week intensively doing what first-year transactional lawyers do. And then next spring, we're going to teach a course where you get to go through and see simulated the life of a merger or acquisition, right, in an M&A simulation course. And so we have those 3 levels. And so if you get the certificate, you're really demonstrating to employers just how deep your knowledge is. And then for your own personal edification, you walk in, and I will be honest, this thing that I just said, I taught a course called due diligence. I probably didn't understand or know much about due diligence until I myself was in charge of teams, meaning I was a senior attorney. When I was a junior attorney, I didn't know much what was going on. And so we're making sure our students walk in on day 1 and are like, due diligence, that's a core skill for a transactional junior attorney. I know what it is, I know why it is, and I can really add value. And that is just, I can't tell you for my 10 years of hiring first-year associates, how important I would have felt it was to have people who knew something on day 1.
We got a question about the certificate, so I'll see if I can share my screen here. The question, I think, was how many courses is the certificate? How many credits, says, is the certificate. So you can see on the screen here that the first course, that's just going to be four credits, but then there's a whole bunch of credits. So you got to take 3 of the following. Most of those are going to be 3-hour courses, so that'll be 9 more credits, and then 2 more, probably 3-hour courses, so 6 more credits. So you're talking total about 19 credit hours. Does that sound right, Lua?
Yeah, I think it's going to be about 16 to 19. Some courses, for example, if you take the basic business organizations course during the summer, it's offered in a 3-credit version. Due diligence is a 2-credit course. So, you know, about 16 to 20.
And a lot of these courses are, in a sense, double dipping in that the regular graduation requirements for KU Law list some of these courses, so taking them accomplishes both goals.
Yeah, and I'll add that leaves plenty of opportunities for clinics, to do study abroad. It really is just part of the curriculum. It will let you specialize in that area, but it won't be to the exclusion of others. To put it in context, it's 90 credits to graduate from KU Law. You take 29 credits the first year, so you have 61 credits left. So of those, 16 to 20 will be from that business law, which might come up with the flip side, which is that enough classes? And what I like to remind folks is, for example, if you're going to go in, there's so much that you learn in law school that applies across many different areas. So if you're going to go into litigation, you need those strong business courses, but you also need civil procedure, jurisdiction. You need evidence classes, all these kinds of classes, which don't have the words business on it, but are directly tied to what you do on a day-to-day basis. Even constitutional law will come into play, in different aspects when you're practicing commercial law. So,
and Steve, I think that's really important. If you came into my office, if you saw on that little thing, it's my name that's listed as the person to come talk to about this business certificate. And I wouldn't tell you to take every single class on that list, because becoming a well-rounded lawyer means you need to know about the legal system. The foundational legal curriculum that you're going to do your first year is what every lawyer in America knows, and it's a language that we all speak. But there are things that aren't listed, like evidence, which I took evidence and I wasn't a hardcore litigator. You know, I stopped doing meaningful litigation long before I needed the rules of evidence. But I understand things, even when I'm drafting a contract, about the evidentiary value of what I'm putting into a deal. That's important. So the amount of credits for the certificate, I think is at the sweet spot of allowing you to develop some expertise while pursuing other interests while becoming well-rounded.
I agree with that completely.
Well, that was a great first question. Thank you, Tony Ruo, for that question. We'd love to hear some more questions. We have a nice size audience here. So I bet you we can get 2 or 3 more questions from the audience if they dig deep and ask a good question about business law. But otherwise, I'll just keep asking questions. So tell me, you guys have both taught first-year classes. I know Professor Ware is teaching contracts this year. Professor Yuille, are you teaching a first-year class this year?
Property.
Property, excellent. Which another subject matter that doesn't have the word business in it, but oh my goodness.
If you ask Professor Yuille, all of our business law courses are just advanced property, right? Because all that business is how do we get together in groups and get more property? So it doesn't have the name, but it's the name of the game.
That's a really fundamental point, which is whether you call them shareholders or some other name, different ways of dividing ownership in a really complicated entity. That is a huge part of business, very foundational. And then the course I teach, contracts, all those transactions we were talking about before, contract law is going to play a big role in them. So the first year courses, contracts and property, just huge foundations for business law and other sorts of law too.
And what is a first year class like? What's a typical, 50 minutes class period? What is involved in that?
Yeah, so if you take my contracts class in the fall, it'll definitely involve reading before class cases and maybe the occasional statutes enacted by legislatures and case law decisions by courts. And we'll be asking questions. Why did the lawyer for this party argue this to the court? And why did this court rule this way? And we will probably have up on the screen in the classroom or by Zoom, we'll have diagrams of the parties and what they were doing in a visual representation. And we'll probably have words up on the screen from the text of the contract or from some governing law. And you will be responding to your classmates' points, sometimes arguing, debating with your classmate in the way lawyers in court might argue, or you might be negotiating, imagining yourself as a transactional lawyer and talking about what contract terms you would want in the deal.
So if you take my class, it's normally offered in the spring, and you don't get to choose. If you are put into my property class, which is normally offered in the spring, I take my starting place from the fact that you spent at least a semester in the vast majority of your classes doing something that looks a lot like what Professor Ware just described, right? Digging into cases, carefully reading statutory language, and then discussing what that should mean in the real lives of people in the context of a dispute. So if you make it to my class, the first thing that we do is spend some time asking the why question. And I said I teach property, so it's a survey course on property law. Why do we have property? What is the point of property? what are we trying to do with this institution, this legal institution we call property? And we spend a lot of time just trying to figure that out, because it's weird. Property is the thing that you know most about when you come to law school, but you don't have the legal language to discuss it. And you may not have thought about deeply why we have property. You just know that we do. So after we spend a lot of time really digging into that, I take a constructivist approach. And what that means is, now that you know what the law is for, let's look at some situations where people are having conflicts around property. And we look at those situations and we try to figure out, what are the options? How could we solve this with a mechanism known as law? And then once we figure out what we could have done, we look at some cases, we look at statutory language and figure out what has been done. And then we ask, let me imagine that someone is having a dispute and this is the outcome that they want. How would I get them there? And we've done all of this stuff thinking about why we have the law. What are our options? What makes it sound like a good idea for the rule to be the way it is? And then we practice trying to pull a decision maker. And I was a transactional lawyer, so I do this in the context of transactions, because in a lot of the rest of your courses, you're going to do it in the context of litigation. So I say, how do I convince another lawyer that my version of the law is what our whole group should do? And we spend a lot of time doing these kinds of transactional simulations in the context of property. And sometimes we watch movies, and I make you do property analyses of movies, because that's fun. Or music videos, or TV shows, because I like all of those things as well.
Well, this is great. I think, you know, as it's part of our times, COVID-19, I think we'll end asking a question or two about that. And then hopefully 2 or 3 years from now, we can edit out the end of this video, and we will never have to talk about COVID-19 again. But were either of you teaching in the spring?
Yes, I taught bankruptcy law in the spring, and I was really proud of the students in that course. And I heard the same thing from other faculty about other students in other courses too, which is when we switched from the traditional in-person classes to the distance classes, the students were all emailing me every day, because I give them assignments every single day where they're emailing me or uploading to the Blackboard website, showing how they understood the reading and how they understood the videos that I made that they were watching, and it really worked pretty smoothly. So there's no substitute for being in the same room, face-to-face interaction. I still think if we can do that safely, that'll be the best outcome. But the remote learning really was a surprisingly good second best.
Yeah, so among the things I do in my free time, I have a doctoral level training in education, and specifically pedagogy, like teaching, how we teach and how we develop curricula. And so it was really interesting to, you know, pretty much for the first time be able to bring a lot of that training to bear with my students. And it also gave me space to do a lot. I do a lot of experimental things. Everyone at KU knows that. At the law school knows that as well. But there were some things that I just hadn't found the impetus to do. And so I was teaching property, and then I taught this due diligence course. But for example, in one of my courses, the assignment for a day after doing the readings was to take a walk and to find in the physical space in the world the manifestations of the law that they had read about. And so that's how they told me, that's how my students told me that they had understood the readings, because they were able to, you know, go out on the streets, and we happened to be studying zoning. And they were able to go out on the streets after having done the reading, and literally they filmed with their cell phones. This is what I saw, and this only exists because of this rule that I found here. And so I think for those of us for whom it was new, we were really pleasantly surprised and found new ways to engage with our students. And for those of us who have thought a lot about this already, we got the opportunity and took the opportunity to, you know, really engage with students. It was a shock. So another thing that I did with my students was have a journal. And my students were journaling, and it wasn't necessarily about class. But I got a lot of feedback from students saying, I really appreciated being asked to reflect on the moment because it allowed me to understand the challenges that I was facing. It allowed me to name them. And then I was able to be, you know, at the top of my game in terms of performance. And I really saw great work product from my students during this period. I saw amazing rallying by my colleagues like Professor Ware to make sure that you had the best, or that our students had the best possible experience they could have in the middle of a pandemic that at the time was shocking us every day. We've gotten to a point where we're not shocked by it, but it was a good 3 weeks where every single day it was like, what? And nonetheless, our community, our students, our faculty, our staff really rallied and I think made it work and showed sort of what it means to be a Jayhawk lawyer.
I agree with that completely, and would just add that the adaptability of KU law students to this shocking change, to be able to roll with it and learn a new way of doing law school very quickly, that really struck me as a huge positive for the long-term careers of these law students. A lot of these folks are in their 20s who are looking forward to maybe 40, even 50-year careers ahead of them, where the world is going to change and what lawyers do is going to change. And the ability to be resilient and adapt to changes, that's a really long-term important trait in a lawyer's professional life.
And I mean, Professor Ware, truer words were never spoken. I started practicing law as I was a law student on September 11th. And so the folks that I worked with, we woke up one day and, you know, I was a law student, so I was still early. I was a 1L. And the legal world.
I was a 1L for 9/11.
Right? And
I mean, that's not something to brag about, but
yeah, right. Like, we walked into our space and the world changed forever.
Yeah.
I also was at I was in New York City. I also was at a New York City law firm in September of 2008 when the market crashed and Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, and the firm that I worked for was dealing with that. But I rode up on an elevator, and it was almost as if while I rode up to the 40-something floor in my law firm on an elevator, the legal world was changing forever. My part of the legal world was changing forever. And I had to roll with the punches. But having been in law school on 9/11 prepared me for that crucial part of the career of a lawyer. And some, much more seasoned lawyers than I would tell me at that time, about every 10 years, your world will change and the law will be made anew. And so we're just about every 10 years seeing that. And the students of today are experiencing that and are going to take that into all the different kinds of places where they wind up being lawyers.
Well, I think this is a great spot to end. I think that's some really nice thoughts about our students and about what it means to be a lawyer in these times and what it means to be a law student in these times. So I want to thank our professors for showing up, Professor Ware and Yuille. I want to thank all of you for joining us who joined us live. And for those of you who are going to see it later on a recording, we hope that you took some value from this, and we really appreciate you joining us. So this is recorded, and I just want to say have a great day. stay healthy, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.